The letter trembled in my hands, its crisp edges suddenly feeling like razor blades against my skin. I read the words again, hoping they'd somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating. They didn't. "Richard, my love," it began. My husband's name, followed by an endearment that wasn't mine to give. I sank onto the edge of our bed, the same bed where Richard and I had made love, shared dreams, and created our beautiful daughter, Lily. Now it felt tainted, as if the secrets hidden within its folds were seeping out to suffocate me. A knock at the door jolted me from my spiral. "Mom?" Lily's voice called out. "Are you okay?" I hastily shoved the letter under a pillow and tried to compose myself. "Come in, sweetie," I managed, forcing a smile as she entered. Lily, all gangly limbs and curious eyes at 14, hesitated in the doorway. "Dad said he's working late again tonight. Can we order pizza?" The mention of Richard sent a fresh wave of nausea through me, but I nodded. "Sure, honey. Why don't you go ahead and call? Get whatever toppings you want." As Lily bounced away, phone already in hand, I retrieved the letter. My fingers itched to tear it to shreds, to burn it and pretend I'd never seen it. But I couldn't. This was evidence, proof of the growing chasm in my marriage that I'd been trying so hard to ignore. I made my way downstairs, letter tucked safely in my pocket. In the kitchen, Lily was chattering away about her day, but her words barely registered. My mind was a whirlwind of questions and accusations. "Mom?" Lily's voice cut through my thoughts. "You're not listening." I blinked, focusing on her concerned face. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I've got a lot on my mind. What were you saying?" She sighed dramatically, in that way only teenagers can. "I was asking if we could invite Grandma over this weekend. Dad's going to be out of town again, and I thought it might be fun. My mother, Grace." The thought of her steady presence was suddenly overwhelmingly appealing. "That's a great idea, Lily. Why don't you give her a call after we eat?" As if on cue, the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of our dinner. We settled at the table, the normalcy of our routine a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. "So where's Dad going this time?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Lily shrugged, mouthful of pizza. "Dunno, some conference thing, I think. He was being all weird about it when I asked." My heart clenched. How long had this been going on? How many conferences had really been rendezvous with his mistress? "Mom?" Lily's voice was small now. "Is everything okay with you and Dad?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the worry etched in her young face. She was perceptive, my girl. Too perceptive sometimes. "We're just going through a rough patch, sweetie," I said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "But don't worry. We'll figure it out." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but I couldn't bring myself to shatter her world. Not yet. After dinner, as Lily chattered away on the phone with her grandmother, I retreated to my home office. The letter felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. I pulled it out, smoothing the creases, and began to read it again, this time looking for clues. The sound of the front door opening made me jump. Richard's voice called out, "I'm home!" Panic surged through me. I wasn't ready to face him, wasn't prepared for the confrontation that was inevitably coming. But as his footsteps approached my office, I knew I had no choice. The door swung open, and there he stood, my husband of 16 years, the father of my child, the man I thought I knew better than anyone in the world. "Sophia," he said, his brow furrowing as he took in my expression. "What's wrong?" I held up the letter, watching as recognition and then fear flashed across his face. "We need to talk, Richard," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Right now." Richard's face drained of color as he stared at the letter in my hand. "Sophia, I can explain," he stammered, but I cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Explain? How exactly do you plan to explain this, Richard?" I waved the letter in front of him. "How long has this been going on?" He closed the office door behind him, his eyes darting nervously. "It's not what you think. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I spat the word back at him. "What's complicated about betraying your wife and family?" Richard ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing. Now it just made my stomach churn. I never meant for this to happen. It just did. I stood up, anger coursing through me. "Things don't just happen, Richard. You made choices that affect all of us." A soft knock on the door interrupted us. "Mom? Dad? Is everything okay?" Lily's voice was muffled but concerned. Richard and I exchanged a panicked look. "Everything's fine, sweetie," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Just grown-up stuff. Why don't you go finish your homework? We waited in tense silence until we heard Lily's footsteps retreat. Then Richard slumped into a chair, looking defeated. What do you want me to say, Sophia? That I'm sorry? Because I am. God, I am. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. Instead, I took a deep breath. I want you to tell me the truth. All of it. And so for the next hour, Richard talked. He told me about meeting her at a conference 2 years ago, about how it started as harmless flirting and spiraled into something more. He spoke of guilt and temptation, of feeling trapped and alive at the same time. With each word, I felt our marriage crumbling around me. 16 years of love, trust, and shared dreams, all reduced to ashes by his selfish choices. What about Lily? I asked when he finally fell silent. Did you ever think about what this would do to her? Richard's face crumpled. Of course I did. That's why I tried to end it several times, but it was never that simple. A horrible thought struck me. Does Lily know? Have you said anything to her? He shook his head vehemently. No, never. I wouldn't put that on her. But something in his eyes made me doubt him. I made a mental note to check Lily's phone, just in case. The thought of involving our daughter in this mess made me sick. So what happens now? I asked, suddenly feeling exhausted. Richard reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I want to make this right, Sophia. I love you. I love our family. I'll do whatever it takes. I looked at him, this man I thought I knew so well, and felt nothing but a hollow ache. I don't know if there's anything you can do to make this right, Richard. I don't even know if I want you to try. His face fell, but before he could respond, we heard a crash from upstairs, followed by Lily's panicked cry. Mom! Dad! We raced up the stairs, momentarily united in our concern for our daughter. We found Lily in the bathroom, pale and shaking, surrounded by shattered glass from a fallen mirror. I don't feel good, she mumbled, swaying on her feet. I caught her just as her knees buckled. As I cradled Lily in my arms, feeling her forehead burning with fever, I glared at Richard over her head. Call an ambulance, I ordered. He hesitated, glancing at his watch. I have an early flight tomorrow. Maybe we should just call the ambulance. My voice was ice cold. In that moment, I saw Richard for who he truly was, a selfish, unreliable man who put his own needs above his family's. As sirens wailed in the distance, I held Lily close, whispering soothing words. My mind raced with worry for my daughter and fury at my husband. One thing was clear. Our lives would never be the same after tonight. The hospital waiting room felt like a prison cell, its sterile walls closing in on me as I waited for news about Lily. Richard had left hours ago, citing his important business trip as an excuse. His absence spoke volumes about where his priorities truly lay. I clutched my phone, debating whether to call my mother, Grace. She'd know what to do, how to handle this mess. But telling her meant making it real, admitting that my perfect little family was falling apart. A doctor approached, his face unreadable. Mrs. Thompson? Your daughter is stable, but we need to run more tests. It appears to be a severe case of pneumonia. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a new wave of worry. Can I see her? He nodded, leading me to Lily's room. She looked so small and fragile in the hospital bed, hooked up to various machines. Her eyes fluttered open as I entered. Mom? Her voice was barely a whisper. I rushed to her side, taking her hand. I'm here, sweetheart. You're going to be okay. Lily's eyes darted around the room. Where's Dad? The question felt like a knife to my heart. He had to go on his trip, honey, but he'll be back soon. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. Lily's face fell, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. He always leaves when I need him, she mumbled. I stroked her hair, fighting back my own tears. I know, baby. I know. As Lily drifted off to sleep, I stepped out into the hallway and finally made the call I'd been dreading. Mom, it's me. I need you. Grace arrived within the hour, her familiar perfume enveloping me as she pulled me into a tight hug. Oh, Sophia, what's happened? I broke down then, telling her everything, Richard's affair, Lily's illness, his abandonment. Grace listened without judgment, her hand steady on my back. That bastard, she muttered when I finished. I always knew he wasn't good enough for you. Despite everything, I found myself defending him. He's Lily's father, Mom. He's not all bad. Grace's eyes narrowed. A good father doesn't abandon his sick child for a business trip, or cheat on his wife for that matter. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Richard. How's Lily? Sorry I had to leave. This deal could mean big things for us. Anger surged through me. I showed the message to Grace, who scoffed. Big things? Like a divorce? The word hung in the air between us. Divorce. Was that where this was heading? A nurse interrupted our tense silence. Mrs. Thompson, your daughter is asking for you. I hurried back to Lily's room, Grace close behind. Lily was sitting up, looking slightly better, but still pale. Grandma, she exclaimed weakly, managing a small smile. Grace moved to Lily's bedside, fussing over her. Oh, my sweet girl, you gave us quite a scare. As they chatted, I noticed Lily's phone on the bedside table. A notification flashed across the screen. A message from Richard. My heart raced as I remembered his hesitation when I asked if Lily knew about the affair. Without thinking, I grabbed the phone, ignoring Lily's confused, Mom? I opened the message thread, my hands shaking. What I saw made my blood run cold. Remember, Lily, not a word to your mother about what you saw. It would break her heart. I looked up, meeting Lily's wide, fearful eyes. She knew. She had known all along. Sophia? Grace's voice was concerned. What is it? I turned the phone screen towards them, watching as understanding dawned on their faces. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Not only had Richard cheated, but he had burdened our daughter with his secret, threatening her into silence. In that moment, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about protecting Lily from her own father's selfishness. Mom, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me, I think I'm going to need a good lawyer. The hospital discharged Lily after 3 days. Her condition improved, but still fragile. As we settled back into our home, the weight of recent revelations hung heavy in the air. Richard hadn't returned from his business trip, and I was grateful for the reprieve. I needed time to think, to plan. Grace had insisted on staying with us, her presence a comforting buffer between Lily and the turmoil threatening to engulf our family. As I tucked Lily into bed that night, her eyes met mine, brimming with unspoken questions. Mom, she began hesitantly, about Dad's messages. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. It's okay, sweetheart. You can tell me anything. Lily's words tumbled out in a rush, detailing how she'd accidentally discovered Richard's affair months ago, how he'd caught her looking at his phone and made her promise to keep quiet. The guilt and fear in her voice broke my heart. I'm so sorry, Mom, she sobbed. I wanted to tell you, but Dad said it would destroy our family. I pulled her close, my own tears falling. Oh, Lily, none of this is your fault. Your father had no right to put that burden on you. As Lily drifted off to sleep, exhausted by her confession, I slipped out of her room, my mind racing. I needed to see those messages for myself, to understand the full extent of Richard's betrayal. With trembling hands, I picked up Lily's phone from her nightstand. The passcode, her birthday, granted me access to a world I wasn't prepared for. The messages from Richard were worse than I'd imagined, manipulative, threatening, even cruel at times. He'd used our daughter's love and loyalty against her, against us both. Remember, this is our little secret. Mom doesn't need to know. If you say anything, it'll break up our family. Is that what you want? You like talking to your mother earlier. You didn't tell her anything, did you? Each message felt like a physical blow. How could the man I'd loved for so long be capable of such callousness? But it wasn't just Richard's messages that caught my attention. There were others, from names I didn't recognize, with content that made my blood run cold. Hey, Lily, got any more of those pills? My buddy's looking to buy. Your dad hooked us up last time. Can you ask him for more? My hands shook as I scrolled through message after message. The pieces started falling into place. Richard's frequent business trips, the unexplained cash I'd found hidden in his desk, his increasingly erratic behavior. This wasn't just an affair. Richard was involved in something far more dangerous, and he'd dragged our daughter into it. A noise from downstairs startled me. I quickly replaced Lily's phone and crept to the top of the stairs. Richard's voice drifted up, low and angry as he argued with someone on his own phone. I told you, I'll have the money soon. Just give me a few more days. No, you can't come here. My family doesn't know anything about this. I retreated to my bedroom, my mind reeling. The man downstairs was a stranger to me now, a liar, a cheater, and possibly a criminal. And he'd used our daughter as a pawn in whatever game he was playing. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. It was about protecting Lily. It's about reclaiming our lives from the web of lies Richard had spun around us. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over the keypad. One call could change everything. To the police? A lawyer? My finger trembled as I made my choice and pressed dial. A sleepy voice answered on the third ring. Sophia? What's wrong? Mom, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I need your help. It's time to take action against Richard, and I think we might need to involve the authorities. As I spoke, I heard Richard's footsteps on the stairs. Time was running out. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. I would do whatever it took to protect my daughter and uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. I ended the call with my mother just as Richard's footsteps reached our bedroom door. My heart raced, but I steeled myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. When he entered, his eyes bloodshot and tie askew, I barely recognized the man I had married. Sophia, he slurred, why are you still up? I stood, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to talk, Richard, now. He stumbled towards me, reaching out, but I stepped back. What's going on? He asked, his brow furrowing. I know everything, I said, my words cutting through the tension. The affair, the threats to Lily, and whatever illegal business you're mixed up in. Richard's face paled, then twisted with anger. You've been snooping through my things? I didn't have to, I retorted. You left a trail a mile wide. How could you involve our daughter in this? He advanced on me, his eyes flashing dangerously. You don't understand. I had no choice. We needed the money. Money? I interrupted, incredulous. What about our family? What about Lily's safety? Richard's demeanor suddenly changed, his voice taking on a pleading tone. I can explain everything, Sophia. Just give me a chance. But I was done listening to his lies. No, Richard, I've given you chances. I've given you years. It's over. His face contorted with rage. You can't do this to me. You have no idea what you're dealing with. As he lunged towards me, I stumbled backwards, knocking over a lamp. The crash echoed through the house, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Lily appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. Mom? Dad? What's happening? Richard froze, the anger draining from his face. Lily, sweetie, go back to bed. Everything's fine. But Lily stood her ground, her gaze shifting between us. No, it's not fine. I heard you yelling. I saw the messages, Dad. I know what you've been doing. The room fell silent, the weight of Lily's words hanging in the air. Richard's shoulders slumped in defeat. I never meant for any of this to happen, he mumbled. I moved to stand beside Lily, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. It's too late for excuses, Richard. We're leaving. Tonight. His head snapped up, panic clear in his eyes. You can't leave. It's not safe. The people I'm involved with are exactly why we need to go, I finished for him. We're not part of whatever mess you've created. As if on cue, Grace appeared behind Lily, car keys in hand. The bags are in the car, she said, her voice firm. Let's go, girls. Richard made one last desperate attempt. Sophia, please. If you leave now, I'll lose everything. I met his gaze, feeling a mixture of pity and resolve. You already have, Richard. You lost us the moment you chose your secrets over your family. With that, I guided Lily out of the room, Grace following close behind. As we descended the stairs, I heard Richard's broken sobs echoing through the house we once called home. Outside, the cool night air hit my face, bringing with it a sense of both fear and freedom. As we climbed into Grace's car, Lily's small voice broke the silence. Mom, where are we going? I turned to look at my daughter, seeing the trust and uncertainty in her eyes. In that moment, I made a decision that would shape our future. Somewhere safe, sweetheart. Somewhere we can start over. As Grace pulled away from the curb, I watched our house disappear in the rearview mirror. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with potential dangers from Richard's mysterious associates. But one thing was clear. There was no going back. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, free from the web of lies that had entangled us for too long. With a deep breath, I turned to face forward, ready to embrace whatever the future held for us. The address on the crumpled paper felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket as I stood outside the nondescript apartment building. My heart raced, but I steeled myself. This was it. The moment I'd confront Richard's mistress and unravel the last threads of his web of lies. I'd left Lily with Grace. telling them I needed to run some errands. They didn't need to know the risks I was taking. As I climbed the stairs, my mind flashed back to the conversation I'd overheard between Richard and his mysterious associates. Whatever he was involved in, it was dangerous, and I needed answers. I knocked on the door, my knuckles white with tension. A moment later, it swung open, revealing a woman I recognized from a photo on Richard's phone. She was younger than me, beautiful in a way that made my stomach churn with insecurity. "Can I help you?" she asked, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Are you Amanda?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Her eyes widened in recognition. "You're Sophia, aren't you? Richard's wife." I nodded, pushing past her into the apartment. "We need to talk." Amanda closed the door, her face a mix of guilt and defiance. "Look, I know what you must think of me." "I'm not here to judge you," I interrupted. "I'm here for the truth. About Richard, about whatever illegal business he's mixed up in, all of it." She paled, sinking onto the couch. "How much do you know?" "Enough to know that my family is in danger," I said, my voice hard. "Richard's been threatening our daughter to keep quiet, and now there are people after him, after us." Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "I never meant for any of this to happen. Richard told me he was separated, that you knew about us. By the time I realized the truth, I was in too deep." "What do you mean, too deep?" I pressed. She took a shaky breath. "Richard, he's not who you think he is. The business trips, the late nights, it was all a cover. He's been moving drugs, laundering money. I didn't know at first, but when I found out—" "He threatened you too," I finished, the pieces falling into place. Amanda nodded, wiping away tears. "He said if I told anyone, he'd make sure I went down with him, but that's not the worst of it." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean? The people he's working for, they're dangerous. They think Richard's been skimming money, they're looking for him, and they don't care who gets hurt in the process." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We know where you are. Where's Richard? You have 24 hours. I showed Amanda the message, watching the color drain from her face. "They must have followed you here," she whispered. Panic clawed at my throat. "Lily? Grace." They were alone, unprotected. "I have to go," I said, rushing towards the door. Amanda grabbed my arm. "Wait, there's something else you need to know. Richard, he's been using Lily to make some of his deliveries. She probably didn't even know what she was carrying." The world tilted on its axis. My daughter, my baby girl, unknowingly caught up in her father's criminal activities. Rage and fear battled within me. "I'm so sorry," Amanda said, her voice breaking. "I should have told someone sooner." I turned to her, my mind racing. "It's not too late. We can still fix this, but I need your help. Will you testify against Richard?" She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, it's time to end this." As we hurried out of the apartment, my phone buzzed again. Another message. "Tick-tock, Sophia. The clock is running." With Amanda by my side, I raced towards my car. We had 24 hours to find Richard, protect my family, and bring down whatever criminal enterprise he'd entangled us in. It seemed impossible, but I had no choice. Everything I loved was at stake. As I started the engine, I made a silent vow. No matter what it took, I would keep Lily safe and put an end to this nightmare once and for all. The final confrontation was coming, and I had to be ready. The clock was ticking as Amanda and I raced back to my mother's house. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every second felt like an eternity, knowing Lily and Grace were in danger. "We need to call the police," Amanda said, her voice trembling. I shook my head. "Not yet. If we do, Richard might run, or worse, those criminals might hurt my family. We need to find him first." As we pulled up to the house, I saw Richard's car parked haphazardly in the driveway. My heart leaped into my throat. He was here. "Stay in the car," I ordered Amanda. "If anything happens, call 911. I burst through the front door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The scene that greeted me was chaos. Richard stood in the living room, wild-eyed and desperate, facing off against my mother, who stood protectively in front of Lily. "Richard," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "It's over. Step away from them." He whirled to face me, his expression a mix of anger and fear. "Sophia, where have you been? They're coming for us. We need to leave now." "No, Richard," I replied, moving slowly towards Lily and Grace. "You need to turn yourself in. It's the only way to keep our family safe." his face contorted with rage. "You don't understand. I did all of this for us, for our future." "By putting our daughter in danger?" I shot back. "By using her as a drug mule?" Lily gasped, her eyes wide with shock. "Dad, is that true?" Richard's anger crumbled, replaced by shame. "Lily, I never meant for you to get involved. I thought I could protect you." "Protect her?" Grace interjected, her voice sharp. "You've done nothing but endanger her and this entire family." As if on cue, the sound of screeching tires filled the air. Through the window, I saw 2 black SUVs pull up, men in dark clothing pouring out. "They're here," Richard whispered, panic etched on his face. In that moment, everything seemed to move in slow motion. I grabbed Lily and pushed her towards the back door. "Mom, take Lily and run! Now!" Grace didn't hesitate, ushering Lily out as the front door burst open. 3 men entered, their eyes cold and calculating. Well, the leader sneered, his gaze fixed on Richard. "Thought you could hide from us, did you?" Richard stumbled backward, his bravado evaporating. "I can explain. I have your money. Just give me more time." The man laughed, a chilling sound. "Time's up, Richard. And look, you've brought your whole family into this mess. How thoughtful." I stepped forward, placing myself between the men and Richard. "This ends now. You want your money? Fine, but you leave my family out of this." The leader raised an eyebrow, amused. "And who might you be?" "I'm the woman who's about to bring your whole operation down," I said, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. I pulled out my phone, showing them the screen. "I've been recording everything. One press of this button, and it all goes to the police." The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. I could feel Richard's eyes boring into me, a mix of fear and awe on his face. The leader's amusement faded, replaced by cold calculation. "You're bluffing." "Try me," I challenged. "I have nothing left to lose. But you have everything to lose." As we stood in this tense standoff, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Amanda must have called the police after all. The leader's eyes darted between me, Richard, and the window. I could see the wheels turning in his head, weighing his options. In that moment, with the police approaching and criminals at my doorstep, I realized the true strength within me. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore, but for Lily, for our future. Whatever happened next, I knew I had the courage to face it head on. The leader made his decision, reaching slowly into his jacket. My breath caught in my throat as I waited to see what he would pull out. A gun or a white flag. The fate of my family hung in the balance, and I steeled myself for whatever came next. The leader's hand emerged from his jacket, not with a gun but a flash drive. "This contains everything," he said, his voice tight. "All of Richard's dealings, our operation, everything. It's yours." As sirens wailed closer, the men retreated, leaving us in stunned silence. Richard collapsed onto the couch, his head in his hands. "Sophia, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." I felt nothing but cold determination as I looked at the man I once loved. "Save it, Richard. It's over." The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and tearful reunions with Lily and Grace. Amanda's testimony, combined with the evidence on the flash drive, was enough to bring down Richard and the entire drug operation. As dawn broke, I sat on the porch of my mother's house, exhausted but relieved. Grace joined me, wrapping a comforting arm around my shoulders. "You did it, sweetheart," she said softly. "You protected your family." I leaned into her embrace, finally allowing myself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. "I just wish I had seen it sooner, Mom. I feel like I failed Lily." Grace shook her head firmly. "You didn't fail anyone, Sophia. You showed incredible strength and courage. Lily is lucky to have you as her mother." As if summoned by our conversation, Lily appeared in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Mom, can I join you?" I opened my arms, and she rushed into them, burying her face in my shoulder. "I'm so proud of you, baby," I whispered, stroking her hair. Lily pulled back, her expression serious. "What happens now? With Dad, I mean." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Your father made some very bad choices, Lily. He's going to have to face the consequences of those choices. But that doesn't mean he doesn't love you." She nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "And us? What happens to us?" I squeezed her hand, including Grace in my gaze. "We start over, together. It won't be easy, but we have each other, and that's what matters most." As the sun rose higher, casting a warm glow over the yard, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, I felt hope. Weeks turned into months, and slowly we began to rebuild our lives. I threw myself into my teaching, finding renewed passion in empowering young minds. Lily, with the help of therapy and our unwavering support, began to heal from the trauma of her father's betrayal. Richard, true to form, tried to reconcile once the dust had settled. He called, sent letters, even showed up at the house once, but each time I stood firm in my resolve. "We're done, Richard," I told him during his last attempt. "I've forgiven you for my own peace, but there's no going back. Lily and I deserve better." As I closed the door on him for the last time, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We were free. One evening, as Lily and I sat on the porch swing, she turned to me with a smile that reminded me so much of her younger self. "Mom, I've been thinking. I want to volunteer at the women's shelter downtown. After everything we've been through, I want to help other families who might be struggling." Pride swelled in my chest. "That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. We can look into it together." As we sat there, planning for the future, I marveled at how far we'd come. The pain and betrayal we'd endured had forged us into stronger, more compassionate versions of ourselves. I looked at my daughter, this remarkable young woman who had faced unimaginable challenges with grace and resilience, and I knew that whatever life threw our way, we would face it together. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. As darkness fell, I felt not fear, but anticipation for the dawn to come. Our story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, we were writing it on our own terms. "For heaven's sake, Mike, can't you just make a decision?" I snapped, my patience wearing thin as I juggled a phone call with my biggest client and my husband's indecisiveness over dinner plans. Mike's shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry, Laura. I just want to make sure everyone's happy." I ended the call and turned to face him, exasperation etched on my face. "It's just dinner, not world peace. Pick something." Before Mike could respond, our son Josh trudged into the kitchen, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hey, Mom, Dad, what's for dinner?" "Your father hasn't decided yet," I said, shooting Mike a pointed look. Josh shrugged. "Whatever's fine. I've got a ton of homework anyway." I felt a pang of guilt. At 16, Josh shouldered more responsibility than most kids his age. "How about I whip up some spaghetti?" "Quick and easy." "Sounds great, Mom," Josh said, already heading upstairs. Mike nodded, relief washing over his face. "That works for me, too." As I started gathering ingredients, the phone rang again. I glanced at the caller ID and groaned. "It's your mother." Mike's eyes widened. "Oh, I forgot to tell you. She wants to talk to us about something important." I raised an eyebrow. "Important enough to interrupt dinner prep?" "Maybe we should put her on speaker," Mike suggested timidly. Sighing, I answered the call and hit the speaker button. "Hello, Miriam." "Laura, dear." Miriam's saccharine voice filled the kitchen. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all," I lied, catching Mike's grateful smile. "What can we do for you?" "Well," Miriam began, her tone shifting to one of practiced vulnerability, "I've been thinking a lot about my living situation. This big house is just too much for me to manage on my own." I froze, a sinking feeling in my stomach. I knew where this was going. "Mom," Mike chimed in, "are you saying you want to move?" "Oh, Mikey," Miriam cooed. "I knew you'd understand. I was hoping. Well, I was wondering if I could come stay with you and Laura for a while." The wooden spoon I'd been holding clattered to the floor. Mike looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Miriam," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "that's quite a big decision. We'd need to discuss it as a family." "Of course, dear," Miriam replied, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I wouldn't want to impose. It's just that I'm not getting any younger, and I miss seeing my Mikey and Josh every day." I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to point out that she'd never shown much interest in Josh before. Mike, emboldened by his mother's words, spoke up. "Mom, why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow? We can talk about it then." "What a lovely idea," Miriam exclaimed. "I'll bring dessert. Laura, dear, I hope you don't mind." "Not at all," I managed, shooting Mike a look that clearly said we'd be discussing this later. After ending the call, I turned to Mike. "You can't be serious about this." "Laura, she's my mother," Mike pleaded. "She needs us." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm brewing inside me. Mike, your mother has never approved of me. How do you think having her here will affect our family? It'll be fine, Mike insisted, his voice lacking conviction. Maybe it'll give her a chance to see how great you are. I laughed bitterly. After 20 years of marriage, she suddenly decides to give me a chance. Please, Laura, Mike begged. Just think about it. As I turned back to the stove, my mind raced. How had my well-ordered life suddenly spiraled into chaos? I'd always prided myself on being able to handle anything, but the thought of Miriam living under our roof sent shivers down my spine. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a series of events that would test the very foundations of our family. As I stirred the spaghetti sauce, I couldn't shake the feeling that agreeing to this dinner tomorrow night might be the biggest mistake of my life. I never thought I'd dread coming home, but as I pulled into the driveway, my stomach churned. It had been 3 weeks since Miriam moved in, and our once peaceful house now felt like a war zone. As I stepped inside, Miriam's shrill voice pierced the air. Mikey, dear, where are my reading glasses? I'm not sure, Mom, Mike replied, his voice strained. Did you check the kitchen counter? I took a deep breath and plastered on a smile. Hello, everyone, I'm home. Miriam appeared in the hallway, her eyes narrowing. Oh, Laura, you're later than usual. I had to start dinner without you. I'm sorry, Miriam. Work was hectic today, I explained, trying to keep my tone neutral. She sniffed disapprovingly. Well, a wife should be home to cook for her family. In my day— Mom, please, Mike interrupted, shooting me an apologetic look. Laura works hard for us. I gave him a grateful nod, but Miriam wasn't finished. I'm just saying, Mikey, that a woman's place is wherever she chooses it to be, I cut in, my patience wearing thin. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to change before dinner. As I headed upstairs, I heard Miriam mutter, no respect for her elders. Honestly, Mikey, I don't know how you put up with it. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to turn around and give her a piece of my mind. Instead, I knocked on Josh's door. Come in, he called. I found him hunched over his desk, surrounded by textbooks. Hey, sweetie, how's the studying going? Josh sighed, rubbing his eyes. It's okay, Mom, just a lot of pressure, you know? I sat on the edge of his bed. I know, honey, but remember, your mental health is important too. Maybe you should take a break? I can't, he said, his voice tight. Grandma Miriam says I need to study harder if I want to get into a good college. My blood boiled. Josh, listen to me. You're doing great, and pushing yourself too hard isn't healthy. Grandma Miriam doesn't what, Laura? Miriam's voice came from the doorway, making us both jump. Doesn't want the best for her grandson? I stood up, facing her. Miriam, we need to talk about this. You can't keep— Dinner's ready, Mike called from downstairs, inadvertently diffusing the situation. Miriam smirked. We'll continue this later, dear. Come along, Josh. You need a good meal to fuel that brilliant mind of yours. As they left, I caught Josh's eye. He looked torn, and my heart ached for him. Dinner was a tense affair. Miriam dominated the conversation, praising Mike's childhood achievements and not so subtly comparing them to Josh's. You know, Mikey was top of his class in math, she boasted. Josh, dear, how are your math grades? Josh squirmed in his seat. They're okay, Grandma. Just okay? Miriam skied. Well, I'm sure if your mother spent more time at home— That's enough, I snapped, slamming my fork down. Miriam, I've had it with your constant criticism. This is my home, and I won't have you undermining me or pressuring Josh. The table fell silent. Mike looked between us, his face pale. Laura, Mom, please. No, Mike, I said, standing up. It's time we addressed this. Miriam, when you moved in, we agreed you'd respect our parenting decisions, but you've done nothing but criticize and interfere. Miriam's eyes flashed. Well, someone has to look out for this family's best interests. Clearly, you're too busy with your career to do so. Mom, Mike exclaimed, finally finding his voice. That's not fair. Laura's an amazing mother and wife. I felt a surge of affection for Mike, but it was quickly doused by Miriam's next words. Oh, Mikey, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You've always been too soft. It's clear who wears the pants in this family. I just hope poor Josh doesn't suffer for it. As Josh pushed back from the table and fled upstairs, I realized something had to change. This couldn't go on. But as I looked at Mike's conflicted face, I wondered if he'd ever be strong enough to stand up to his mother. Little did I know this dinner confrontation was just the beginning of a storm that would tear our family apart. The next morning I woke to the sound of hushed voices downstairs. Creeping to the top of the stairs, I listened, my heart sinking with each word. "Mom, I don't know what to do," Mike whispered. "Laura's been so stressed lately." Miriam's voice dripped with false concern. "Oh, Mikey, I've been thinking, maybe it's time Laura took a step back from her job. For the sake of the family, of course." I gripped the banister, my knuckles turning white. How dare she? "I don't know, Mom," Mike replied, uncertainty clear in his voice. "Laura loves her job." "But does she love it more than her family?" Miriam pressed. "Josh's grades are slipping, and you're always so tense. A wife's place is in the home, Mikey. You know that." I'd heard enough. Storming down the stairs, I confronted them in the kitchen. "Is that what you really think, Miriam, that I should give up my career?" Mike jumped, spilling his coffee. "Laura, we were just talking about me behind my back." I finished for him. "I heard everything." Miriam had the audacity to look offended. "Laura, dear, we're just concerned about the family's well-being." "No," I snapped. "You're concerned about controlling everyone's lives. This ends now." Just then, Josh trudged into the kitchen, dark circles under his eyes. "What's going on?" "Nothing, sweetie," I said, trying to soften my tone. "How did you sleep?" "Not great," he mumbled. "I was up late studying for my calculus test." Miriam pounced on the opportunity. "See, if you were home more, Laura, you could help Josh with his studies." "That's it," I exploded. "Miriam, I want you out of this house. Today." The kitchen fell silent. Mike looked between us, panic in his eyes. "Laura, please. Mom didn't mean—" "Oh, I meant every word," Miriam interrupted, her mask of politeness finally slipping. "Someone needs to look out for this family's best interests, and clearly it's not you, Laura." Josh's eyes widened. "Grandma, that's not fair. Mom works hard for us." "Stay out of this, Josh," Mike said, his voice strained. "Laura, can we talk about this privately?" I shook my head, tears threatening to spill. "No, Mike. I'm done talking. Either Miriam leaves or I do." The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Mike looked torn, his gaze darting between his mother and me. "Mikey," Miriam said softly, "you can't let her do this. I'm your mother." I held my breath, waiting for Mike to stand up for our family, for me. But as the seconds ticked by, his silence spoke volumes. "I see," I whispered, my heart breaking. "Josh, go pack a bag. We're leaving." "What?" Josh exclaimed. "Mom? No." Mike finally found his voice. "Laura, please, we can work this out." But I was already heading upstairs, Josh reluctantly following. As I threw clothes into a suitcase, my mind raced. Where would we go? What would this mean for our family? Miriam's voice carried up the stairs. "Mikey, you can't let them leave. What about my grandson?" That was the last straw. I marched back downstairs, suitcase in hand. "Your grandson? Josh is my son, Miriam, and I won't let you poison him with your outdated sexist views." Mike stepped between us. "Laura, Mom, please. Can't we talk about this calmly?" "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my voice ice cold. "You've made your choice, Mike. You chose your mother over your wife and son." As Josh and I headed for the door, Miriam called out, "You'll regret this, Laura. You're tearing this family apart." I turned back, meeting her gaze. "No, Miriam. You did that the moment you moved in." With that, Josh and I walked out, leaving behind a stunned Mike and a fuming Miriam. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of Mike in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway looking lost. "Mom," Josh said quietly, "what happens now?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter, fighting back tears. "I don't know, honey, but we'll figure it out together." Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a battle that would test every ounce of my strength and resolve. 3 days after our dramatic exit, I found myself pacing the floor of Jane's guest room. My best friend had graciously offered us a place to stay while I figured out our next move. "Laura, sit down before you wear a hole in my carpet," Jane said, handing me a steaming mug of coffee. I sank onto the bed, my hands shaking. "I'm sorry, Jane. I can't believe this is happening." She sat beside me, her lawyer face on. "Have you heard from Mike?" "He's called a dozen times," I sighed. "I haven't answered." "Maybe you should," Jane suggested gently, "at least to discuss Josh's situation." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Mike's face flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Laura?" Mike's voice was strained. "Please, can we talk?" I took a deep breath. "Fine. Talk." "Mom's gone too far this time," he said. "I've asked her to leave." My heart skipped a beat. You have? Yes, he replied. I realize now how much damage she's caused. Please, come home. We can work this out. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest, but then I remembered all the times Mike had failed to stand up for me, for us. I don't know, Mike, I said cautiously. A lot has happened. I know, he pleaded. But I love you, Laura. We can fix this. Before I could respond, I heard Miriam's voice in the background. Mikey? Who are you talking to? My blood ran cold. Mike, is your mother still there? His hesitation was all the answer I needed. You lied to me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Laura, wait. I hung up, my hands trembling with rage. Jane looked at me, concern etched on her face. What happened? I relayed the conversation, my anger building with each word. He lied, Jane. He said Miriam was gone, but she's still there. Jane's expression hardened. Laura, I think it's time we discussed your options, legally speaking. As she outlined potential scenarios, divorce, custody arrangements, property division, my mind whirled. Was this really the end of my marriage? A soft knock interrupted us. Josh peeked in, his eyes red-rimmed. Mom, can I talk to you? Jane excused herself, leaving us alone. Josh sat beside me, looking more vulnerable than I'd seen him in years. Mom, I heard you talking to Dad, he said quietly. Are you guys getting divorced? My heart broke. Oh, honey, I don't know yet. Your dad and I have a lot to work through. Josh nodded, then surprised me with his next words. I think maybe you should. What? I gasped. Ever since Grandma moved in, everything's been awful, he continued. Dad never stands up for us, and you're always so sad, Mom. I hate seeing you like this. Tears welled in my eyes as I pulled him into a hug. I'm so sorry, Josh. I never wanted you to be caught in the middle of this. As we held each other, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Miriam. Laura, this childish behavior needs to stop. You're hurting Mikey and destroying this family. If you truly love your son, you'll come home and be the wife and mother you're supposed to be. Rage boiled inside me. How dare she? After everything she'd done, she still had the audacity to lecture me? In that moment, something snapped. I realized I was done being the peacekeeper, done sacrificing my happiness for a family that didn't appreciate me. I looked at Josh, seeing the strength and maturity in his eyes. You're right, honey. Things can't go on like this. Taking a deep breath, I made a decision that would change our lives forever. It's time to end this, once and for all. As I stood up, determination coursing through me, I knew the real battle was just beginning. Miriam had no idea what she was in for. This time, I wouldn't back down. This time, I would fight for myself, for Josh, and for the life we deserved. Little did Miriam know, she had just awakened a force she couldn't reckon with. The gloves were off, and I was ready for war. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Jane had helped me draft a plan of action, and I was ready to reclaim my life. But first, I needed to face Mike and Miriam one last time. As Josh and I pulled into our driveway, my resolve wavered. This house held so many memories, both good and bad. Taking a deep breath, I turned to my son. You don't have to come in if you don't want to, I said softly. Josh shook his head. No, Mom, I'm with you. His words gave me strength. We walked to the front door, and I used my key for what I knew would be the last time. The moment we stepped inside, Miriam's voice rang out. Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence. Mike appeared from the living room, his face a mixture of relief and anxiety. Laura, Josh, thank God you're home. We're not staying, I said firmly. We're here to collect our things. Miriam scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. This tantrum has gone on long enough. I ignored her, focusing on Mike. I've made my decision, Mike. I want a divorce. The color drained from his face. Laura, please, we can work this out. Can we? I challenged, because from where I'm standing, nothing's changed. Your mother's still here, still controlling our lives. Miriam stepped between us. Now see here, young lady, you can't just throw away 20 years of marriage because you're feeling a little unappreciated. Something inside me snapped. A little unappreciated? You've done nothing but undermine and belittle me since the day you moved in. And you, I turned to Mike, you've let her do it, every single time. Mike reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Laura, I love you. Please don't do this. If you loved me, I said, my voice breaking, you would have stood up for me, for us. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jane. Emergency at the office. Need you ASAP. I looked at Mike and Miriam, suddenly realizing how small they seemed, how insignificant their drama was compared to the life I'd built for myself. "I have to go," I said. "Work emergency. Josh, can you start packing your things?" Miriam's eyes flashed. "Work? You're choosing work over your family? I always knew you were selfish, but that's enough." To everyone's surprise, it was Josh who spoke up. "Grandma, you don't get to talk to Mom like that, not anymore." Pride swelled in my chest as Josh stood tall, facing down his grandmother. Mike looked between us, confusion and hurt etched on his face. "Josh, buddy, what are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying I'm going with Mom," Josh replied. "I'm tired of the fighting, of walking on eggshells in my own home. Mom's the only one who's ever put me first." Miriam gasped dramatically. "Mikey, are you going to let them leave? They're tearing this family apart." As Mike hesitated, torn between his mother and his family, my phone buzzed again. Jane's message flashed on the screen. "Laura, it's about the house. You need to see this now." A chill ran down my spine. What could be so urgent? I looked at Mike, seeing the conflict in his eyes. For a moment, I almost wavered, but then I remembered all the times he'd chosen his mother over me, over our family. "Josh, change of plans. We need to go to Aunt Jane's office right away," I said, my voice steady. "Mike, we'll be back for our things later. Have them ready." As we walked out the door, I heard Miriam's shrill voice. "Mikey, do something!" But Mike remained silent, and that silence spoke volumes. In the car, Josh looked at me, worry creasing his brow. "Mom, what's going on?" I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing. "I don't know, honey, but whatever it is, we'll face it together." As we drove towards Jane's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were about to change dramatically. Little did I know, the bombshell waiting for us would alter the course of our future forever. Jane's office was a flurry of activity when Josh and I arrived. She ushered us into her private room, her face grim. "Laura, I'm glad you're here," she said, closing the door. "We've uncovered something troubling." My heart raced. "What is it, Jane?" She pulled out a thick file. "I've been looking into your financials, preparing for the divorce proceedings. Laura, there are some significant discrepancies." As Jane explained, my world tilted on its axis. Apparently, large sums of money had been systematically withdrawn from our joint accounts over the past year. Money I knew nothing about. "How much?" I whispered, dreading the answer. Jane's voice was soft but firm. "Nearly $500,000, Laura." The room spun. I gripped the edge of her desk, trying to steady myself. That's impossible. I would have noticed." "Mom?" Josh's voice sounded far away. "What does this mean?" I turned to my son, seeing the fear in his eyes. "I don't know, honey, but we'll figure it out." Jane continued, her lawyer mode in full swing. "There's more. The withdrawals coincide with Miriam's move-in date, and they've been transferred to an offshore account." The pieces started falling into place. Miriam's sudden interest in living with us, her constant undermining, her attempts to drive a wedge between Mike and me. It had all been a calculated plan. "She's been stealing from us," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And Mike, he must have known." Josh stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. "How could Dad do this to us?" I pulled him into a hug, my mind racing. "I don't know, sweetie, but we're going to find out." Just then, my phone buzzed, a text from Mike. "On our way to Uncle Bob's funeral. Why aren't you answering my calls? We need to talk." A cold determination settled over me. This was my chance. "Jane," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "what are my options?" She leaned forward, all business. "We can file for an emergency injunction to freeze the accounts, and with this evidence, we have a strong case for divorce on grounds of financial infidelity." I nodded, a plan forming. "Do it, and I need one more thing." 20 minutes later, Josh and I were back home. Mike and Miriam would be gone for hours, giving us the time we needed. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Josh asked as we packed our essentials. I paused, looking around the home we'd built together. "No, honey, but I'm sure we can't stay here anymore." As we worked, I drafted a text to Mike. "I know about the money. Don't bother coming home. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." My finger hovered over the send button. This was it, the point of no return. With a deep breath, I pressed send. Moments later, my phone exploded with calls and texts from Mike. I ignored them all. As Josh and I loaded the last of our things into the car, I took one final look at the house. So many memories, good and bad. But it wasn't home anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. "Ready?" I asked Josh. He nodded, a mix of sadness and determination in his eyes. Ready, Mom. We drove away, leaving behind the life we'd known. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. Miriam and Mike had underestimated me. They thought I was weak, that I'd roll over and accept their betrayal. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As we pulled into the driveway of our new apartment, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Miriam. You ungrateful witch! How dare you accuse us of stealing? You'll regret this, Laura. Mark my words. I smiled grimly, feeling a strange sense of calm. The battle lines were drawn. Miriam wanted a war? Fine, she was about to find out just how formidable an opponent I could be. Little did she know I had one more ace up my sleeve. And when I played it, their whole world would come crashing down. The morning after we moved into our new apartment, my phone exploded with notifications. Mike and Miriam had returned from the funeral, and all hell had broken loose. Laura, open this door right now. Mike's voice boomed through the intercom. I glanced at Josh, who was pale but resolute. Should we let them up, Mom? He asked. I took a deep breath. No, honey, we're doing this on our terms now. I pressed the intercom button. Mike, I told you, it's over. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Lawyer? Miriam's shrill voice cut in. You ungrateful hussy. After everything we've done for you. I laughed bitterly. Everything you've done? You mean stealing $500,000 from us? There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Mike's voice suddenly small. Laura, please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain, I replied, my voice ice cold. I know about the offshore account, Mike. I know about everything. More pounding on the lobby door. You can't keep my grandson from me, Miriam screeched. Josh stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. I'm not your property, Grandma. I chose to come with Mom. Pride swelled in my chest, but before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Jane. Laura, turn on the news, now. With shaking hands I flipped on the TV. My jaw dropped as I saw Mike's face plastered across the screen, the headline screaming, Local businessman implicated in major embezzlement scheme. Oh my God, I whispered. Josh's eyes widened. Mom, what's happening? Before I could answer, there was a commotion downstairs. Through the window, I saw police cars pulling up, officers rushing towards Mike and Miriam. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Mike. What have you done? I stared at the message, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part ached for the man I'd once loved. Mom? Josh's voice pulled me back. Did you do this? I turned to my son, seeing the confusion and hurt in his eyes. No, honey, I didn't know about the police, but I did tell Jane to look into Dad's finances. Josh nodded slowly, processing. So what happens now? As if in answer, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find two stern-faced detectives. Mrs. Thompson, we need to ask you some questions about your husband's financial activities. For the next 2 hours, Josh and I were interrogated separately. They wanted to know if I was involved, if I had benefited from the embezzled funds. By the time they left, I felt drained and hollow. I found Josh sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. The news was still covering the story, now showing footage of Mike and Miriam being led away in handcuffs. Oh, Josh, I said, pulling him into a hug. I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to go this far. He clung to me, his body shaking with silent sobs. It's not your fault, Mom. They did this, not you. As we sat there, holding each other, my phone buzzed once more. It was Jane. Laura, I've got more news. The house, it's not just in your name. It's part of a trust set up by Mike's late father for Josh. I gasped. What? Miriam and Mike have been trying to break the trust for months. That's where the money was going. They were paying off judges, trying to get control of Josh's inheritance. The pieces fell into place. Miriam's obsession with Josh, her constant criticism of my parenting, it had never been about family. It had always been about money. As the reality of our situation sank in, I realized this was far from over. We'd won this battle, but the war was just beginning. And as I held my son, watching our old life crumble on the TV screen, I knew one thing for certain. I would fight with everything I had to protect Josh and the future that was rightfully his. Miriam and Mike had underestimated me for the last time. Now, they were about to learn just how fierce a mother's love could be. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I took my seat beside Jane. Across the aisle, Mike sat with his lawyer, looking haggard and defeated. Miriam was conspicuously absent, having been denied bail due to flight risk. As the judge entered, a hush fell over the room. This was it, the culmination of months of legal battles, sleepless nights, and emotional turmoil. "All rise," the bailiff called out. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, surveyed the courtroom. "We're here to finalize the divorce proceedings of Laura and Michael Thompson, as well as to address the matter of Joshua Thompson's trust fund. Let's begin." For the next hour, lawyers presented arguments, financial records were scrutinized, and witnesses were called. Through it all, I kept my eyes fixed on Josh, who sat in the gallery, his face a mask of determination. Finally, the judge cleared her throat. "Having reviewed all the evidence, I'm ready to make my ruling." My heart pounded as she continued. "First, regarding the divorce. Given Mr. Thompson's financial misconduct and the evidence of emotional abuse, I'm granting the divorce in favor of Mrs. Thompson." A wave of relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. "As for the matter of Joshua Thompson's trust fund," the judge continued, "I find the attempts by Mr. Thompson and his mother, Miriam Thompson, to illegally access these funds to be reprehensible." Mike's head dropped into his hands. "The trust will remain intact, with Mrs. Laura Thompson appointed as sole trustee until Joshua reaches the age of 25. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. We'd won. It was over, but as I turned to smile at Josh, the courtroom doors burst open. Miriam, somehow out on bail, stormed in. "This is an outrage," she screeched. "You can't do this to my family." The judge banged her gavel. "Mrs. Thompson Sr., you are out of order. Bailiff, remove her immediately." As the bailiff approached, Miriam's eyes locked on mine. In that moment, I saw the full extent of her hatred and desperation. "You!" she spat. "You've ruined everything." Before anyone could react, she lunged at me, her hands clawing at my face. I stumbled backward, shocked by the ferocity of her attack. "Mom!" Josh yelled, rushing forward. In the chaos that followed, I heard Mike's voice rise above the din. "Mother, stop! It's over!" The bailiff finally restrained Miriam, who continued to shriek and struggle. As they dragged her away, I saw something I never expected. Mike was crying. Our eyes met across the courtroom. For a moment, I saw a glimmer of the man I'd once loved, lost, broken, and finally free from his mother's control. "I'm sorry, Laura," he mouthed before being led away by his lawyer. As the courtroom settled, the judge called for order. "In light of this incident, I'm adding a restraining order against Miriam Thompson. She is to have no contact with Laura or Joshua Thompson." With a final bang of her gavel, it was truly over. Outside the courthouse, Josh hugged me tight. "We did it, Mom. We're free." I held him close, marveling at his strength. "Yes, we are, honey. We're free." Jane approached, a wide smile on her face. "Congratulations, Laura. You were amazing in there." I shook my head. "We were amazing. I couldn't have done this without you, Jane." As we walked away from the courthouse, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, I felt hope. That night, as Josh and I sat in our new apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, I realized something profound. "You know, Josh," I said, "for years I thought I was fighting for our family. But really, I was fighting for us, you and me. We're the family that matters." Josh smiled, his eyes shining. "We always were, Mom. We always will be." As I hugged my son, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. Miriam and Mike had tried to break us, but they'd only made us stronger. In the end, love, real, unconditional love, had triumphed over greed and manipulation. And as I looked at Josh, I knew that was the greatest victory of all.